Okay, so when I talk about residential and commercial leases, what comes to mind? What comes to mind when you're dealing with a lease? Renting. Okay. Who owns the property? Landlord. Property always reverts back to the landlord. We have what's called leasehold rights, which means as a tenant, we get the rights to occupy, physically be on the property for the period of our lease. But when our lease is done, the property is always going to revert back to the landlord. So the whole issue of a lease is it's a temporary use. You don't own it forever. However, in Hawaii and other places like that, they actually do 99-year leases. So people can finance their houses even though they don't own the land. They still get a legal description. They can still finance the houses because it's thought of as a 99-year lease. It's thought of that people are living there forever. Same kind of thing. It's a different ownership, the way it works. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about different types of tenancies. We're going to talk about different types of rental rates, primarily in commercial real estate. You won't need to know a lot of this for the test, but you need to kind of understand the gist of these issues. Duties of landlords and tenants. Tenants have duties as well. We're going to talk about the implied covenants contained in residential leases. We're going to recognize remedies of landlords and tenants when somebody defaults, whether it's the landlord or tenant defaulting. We're going to talk about what terms are included in some commercial leases, and then we're going to also talk about assignments and subleases. And assignments and subleases can happen in residential or commercial leases. So we'll talk about how that all works. Leasehold estates. Again, you need to understand that there are these 4 different types of tenancies. They're called leasehold estates. It's called a tenancy for years, a periodic tenancy, a tenancy at will, and a tenancy at sufferance. The last 2 are the easiest to deal with. A tenancy at sufferance means that the tenant is holding over. So they're basically staying on, without the landlord's true consent, but they hold over. In most of our residential leases, we let people stay on as tenants in sufferance, and we just kind of keep renewing the lease. It becomes a month-to-month lease. You pay your rent, you stay for a month. You keep paying your rent for a month, you keep staying for a month, until the landlord makes you, this tenancy at will, until the landlord makes you re-sign or comes back to you. In commercial leases, we have holdover provisions, and we tell the tenants, if you don't renegotiate your lease, you're going to pay 125 to 150% of your rental rate for holding over. And we do this to encourage tenants to renegotiate their leases because landlords want guaranteed contracts in commercial leases because that's how they value the property. That's basically what they're selling. The tenancy at sufferance is somebody that's holding on. Basically, they're in there if a landlord isn't doing everything they should be doing. You, as a residential tenant in Hamilton County, can go down to the courthouse, pay your rent to the courthouse, and file a legitimate complaint to say the landlord is doing some things that make my apartment not safe. They've let the utilities be disconnected or some other reason. Therefore, I want to pay my rent into escrow at the courthouse. That way, the landlord can't evict me. The landlord can bring an eviction suit, and if they do, and they find out that the tenants are paying into the court system, that eviction suit will be stopped. But the other thing that happens for tenants that go to the courts to get help, the courts will also follow up with the landlord. They'll issue letters. They'll do some things like that to get the landlord to make repairs. So the tenants aren't totally on their own. But it's the only weapon that our tenants have, especially our poorer tenants have, to try to fight the system, is they go to the court and have the court help them. The tenancy for years and a periodic tenancy, we're going to talk about what they are, what makes them happen. For most of your test questions in any real estate exam you're going to have, you're going to know that we have these different types of lease, and you'll be able to read through it to figure out how to answer the question. So tenancy for years is an estate for a fixed period of time. The termination is automatic, and there's a writing requirement that says it's going to terminate and we give notice, we do something like that. Whereas a periodic tenancy lasts for a fixed period of time and continues for like periods of time until either landlord or tenant gives notice. So, I'm a 1-year tenant. I keep paying my rent, I automatically become another 1-year tenant. I got to keep paying my rent, I got to keep doing things. But until the landlord tries to raise the rent or recast the lease, I can become this tenant that kind of just keeps renewing. So that would be the periodic tenancy. The tenancy for years, like I said, it does expire. So when a lease is done, you're supposed to pick up, move out, turn the keys back over to the landlord. Periodic tenancy, there is also a notice required. Typically in Cincinnati, Hamilton County, Southern Ohio, when we do leases, residential leases hold over month to month. So we also give landlord 30 days notice when we're going to leave, or the landlord gives us 30-day notice to leave. That's where the whole 30-day notice thing came in. You pay your rent, you stay for a month. You don't pay your rent, you get your notice, you're gone. Tenancy at will, again, no state term or rent amount. Tenancy is terminable at the will of either party. The tenancy at sufferance is created when tenant remains in possession of the property after tenancy is terminated. It allows the landlord to collect the rent from the holdover tenant as well. But again, you can also say, wait a minute, they're not doing what they should be doing. Rental rates. Everything we do in residential is typically considered a gross lease. In other words, now you may have the meters in your own, you may pay your own utilities, but typically when you rent, everything's included. You just pay one monthly rent, and you presume the hallways are going to get cleaned, common areas are going to get cleaned, the pool will be maintained. All those kind of things are done for that monthly rent. That's a gross lease. It's a fixed monthly amount, and it includes everything. A percentage lease is what we see in resident and retail leases. It's a fixed base rent and a percentage of the revenue earned from the business. However, bigger malls today, such as Kenwood, have kind of done away with the percentage rent because it makes a whole nother layer of paperwork that the landlord has to chase the tenant down to get their sales numbers. Then once they get the sales numbers, they have to compare the lease. It says if they hit over the threshold, then they're supposed to give a percentage back to the landlord. Then the landlord has to chase the tenant down to get the additional rent. It's a pain in the butt on percentage leases. In my whole portfolio, I still do have a couple leases that are percentage leases. And every now and then we get surprised and we get an extra check. And then we got to go back and figure, oh, why do we get more money? Because the tenant exceeded their sales. And what the tenant agrees to do when they negotiate this percentage rent, they're saying, landlord, based on how you're operating the property, especially malls, because you're doing so many promotions, you're getting so many people to come in, you're increasing the business by all of the positive ways you're operating the property, we're going to come in at a break point, and if we exceed that break point, we're going to give you, landlord, an extra percentage rent of what we make. That's a win-win for everybody. The landlord's done a good job maintaining the center, getting people to come to the center, the tenant's making more money, so they give the landlord part of that. Nobody's negotiating blind when they do this. Most of these people belong to the International Council Shopping Center. They get published data. They see what a typical shoe store in a Class A or B neighborhood or center should sell, whether it's a shoe carnival or a DSW shoe or something like that. Those guys know what their per square foot sales are depending on what kind of centers they go in. The landlords receive that data, they see it. The tenants receive that data, they see it. So when they're negotiating these percentage leases and they're negotiating their break points, everybody kind of knows where they're at. It's a game they play, but they know where they're at.
I had heard that with some of the very first restaurants that were opening up on Vine Street, like on the Gateway quarter, right when that was starting to move forward, that 3CDC was going, having lower fixed base rent, but they were asking for a percentage of the earned revenue.
Yeah, they can do that.
Those types of
and that's a hurdle. It's to allow businesses to start up,
Sure.
do that changing neighborhood. They say, okay, you can come in at a low rent, but once you start making X dollars, we expect you to give us a percentage of that. So that's very common. In some of my centers where the tenants aren't doing so well, they'll come back to us before they leave, and they'll say, we'd like to renegotiate our lease, but we only want to pay a percentage rent. And if we don't want to see the vacancy, or we don't have a replacement tenant, we'll agree to that.
Yeah.
It's better than having a vacancy.
Sure.
Now, one of the things, we have a tenant that's saying, okay, we want to stay on a percentage rent, we're going to sign a 1 or 2 year renewal, but if you find a replacement tenant, simply give us 90 days notice and we're gone. That's win-win for the landlord too. That means the landlord can continue to market the property, they at least get something out of the tenant. And what we're doing with the low percentage rents, when you come in less than 10% of gross sales or whatever, The landlord is covering their cost to operate. They're not making profit to pay the mortgage or to see the property increase in value. All they're doing is kind of covering operating costs.
Oh, wow. Up to 10%, like 10% is low, you think?
Yes.
Oh, it's
Yes.
really high to me.
It's in overall compared to the lease rates, that's low. Compared to the lease rates that they would actually get, that's a low number.
So I thought some of the restaurants would do like 1%.
Oh no. When we're talking about sit-down restaurants, if they make, if they pay anywhere from 6 to 10%, again, compared to the rent dollar that they would negotiate, still the landlord is paying his operating costs. He's not making a lot of profit. Yeah, it's a little different. And hard goods, same kind of thing. Clothing stores, same kind of thing. Where we got the extra check was Marshall's. Does a real good business. And we got an extra check and went back and looked at the lease. Oh, why do we get this check? Well, Marshall's exceeded their sales in that center. So again, percentage leases, it's a lot of paperwork to chase down these numbers and watch what's going on. You got to get reporting all the time. Triple net leases. These are fixed gross amount each month and a payment of property's operating expenses. So triple net leases, we have triple net, we have double net, we have net. All kinds of different things talk about a net lease. A net lease is basically the tenant pays a base rent, and then the landlord goes back and says, okay, these are our operating costs, you pay your share of operating costs. A true net lease would be Walgreens on a corner lot. Walgreens builds the building, they pay just a rent for the lot. They build the building, they insure the building, they repair the building, they pay all the real estate taxes, they pay all the insurance. They simply cut a check to the landlord every month for the rent, for the ground lease. That's a true net lease, would be that kind of situation. McDonald's does a lot of those as well. When you have the great big store chains where they rent just the ground, they're paying what we call net leases. Just a base rent, then they pay all the operating costs, cover everything. That works great. An example of a net lease. Think about this. Topgolf. Topgolf does a ground lease for us, with us. They pay all their own real estate taxes, and they pay all their expenses to maintain their building. They take care of their landscaping, their snow removal, their building, everything. And all they do, and they pay their taxes and insurance, they just pay us a base rent. So that's a true net lease. They don't share in any of the operating costs for the rest of the center for landscaping or snow removal. They take care of everything on their own site, which is fine. It works. And that's, again, everybody that negotiated that lease knew what they were doing. The asset manager knows what the costs are to operate the center. He knows the give and take when he's negotiating with the tenant to do that kind of a lease. Yeah.
But there's not really common in shopping centers, more of like, but how it's kind of its own spot right there. But not like, I don't know, like I feel like, so the percentage leases are usually, like you'll see those more in shopping centers, and like if you had a true net, it would be like a bigger, like they bring in a lot of like a lot of sales. I don't know, I'm trying to think, like, yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
think of it this way. When we have a shopping center, we typically have anchor tenants.
Yeah.
So our anchor tenants very often are net tenants. They may not share an operating cost. They may just pay us a base rent, but they pay for their own real estate taxes if they're a separate parcel, and they may pay for their own snow removal. Others, their anchor tenants, share in the snow removal costs or do some different things because it might be difficult to partition it out. So it depends upon what it is. What size of the center, what's the configuration, how is it looking to where you can fix that.
If it's a big entity like that, you know what I mean?
Again, it just depends. Again, so Topgolf, think about how Topgolf sits in my center there. They're in the very southern end. They have nothing else to do with any other tenants, with things going on. It was real easy to give them their own tax parcel when they built. We had new surveys done, we created new tax parcels, put that with the county, and because they are on their own, again, they do all their own snow removal, they take care of all the maintenance, they built their own building. They do everything. Now, when they leave, 20 years from now, they leave a building. They leave the freaking golf course, too. I mean, it's like, I've never been able to play it, I just watch. But all that stuff stays with the land. So this is this whole thing about a lease. When you build a building and you do improvements, it all stays with the land.
Those would be trade fixtures?
The building would not be demolished.
That would be really hard to sell it.
Yeah, the building would not be demolished. So yeah, now they'll take out the interior finishes and bars and some things like that if it's easy enough to remove. If it's built, if it's theirs.
Yeah.
But if it's truly built into the building, okay. So when Topgolf's lease is done, okay, there's a certain way that whole thing operates with the balls when they go down the hole and they come back and all the other stuff that goes on. It's a lot of mechanism underneath the ground that you don't see. But if they were to start tearing that apart, it loses a lot of value. So when they leave, they're going to leave all of that. And the lease will say that. If I go back and actually pull it, I'll see what it says.
Well, like, I mean, I'm looking at like Kenwood Town Center.
Kenwood Town
The
Center.
Cheesecake Factory.
Uh-huh.
It's gotta be an anchor. Because anytime you have a unique facade like that, that's, you know, I mean, that's, I would guess.
And it's a ton of money to do their fixtures, their
Right.
light fixtures, the whole finish of the interior finishes is a lot of money.
But it's not its own entity. I'm just trying to figure out how that would work to do the.
They pay a base rent and then they pay their share of common area costs. Yeah, they absolutely do. But they don't pay percentage rent anymore. So a Cheesecake Factory, when they're coming in, okay, because of Cheesecake Factory, their sales probably every year are probably about $12 million. Just easy numbers. Just think about it, $1 million a month. So if they're saying, okay, our break point is $12 million. If we were going to do percentage rent, landlord, you have such a great center. If we sell over $15 million, we'll give you a piece of that. But because it's Kenwood has said, we don't even care about the percentage rent anymore. We're going to negotiate the best possible flat dollar lease we can. Tenants pay their share of operating costs, but we don't come back and ask for a percentage rent anymore. And Kenwood starts about $50 a square foot for rent for small stores. Now, the big stores, I don't know what their rent is. The joke is what did Kenwood pay to put Nordstrom's in? Okay, to get that kind of a tenant there. Because once Nordstrom's was built, if you've watched Kenwood over the years, they had a bunch of women's clothing stores and the fine accessory stores that actually went from one end of the mall and moved up to that end of the mall. And recently now, Talbot's has thought, we don't have to be in the mall anymore. They actually moved across the street. And that's good for Kenwood Town Center because there's constant turnover. They're able to make the stores appear and stay fresh and have people want to come back to say, what's new, what's going on here. I actually have part of the tile of the floor from years ago in my basement when the Pogues was turned into a JCPenney store years ago, before it was Parisian. So years ago, things have been happening, again, going on for a long time. The lady who manages Kenwood Town Center, she's been there for 30 years. Wanda is her name. And Wanda has a long history at Kenwood. She's had a lot of people that have learned the business under her and then gone on for General Growth Properties. She's a starting point. She hires people, young kids, trains them, and then they send them out to other malls. But General Growth, again, is a huge mall company and what they do. It's a cool business, but again, retail is probably one of the hardest businesses as far as property management goes. Okay, rental rate increases. The landlord and tenant can agree to rental rate increases in a lease. So we have stepped leases, and that's very common. The goal of a landlord is to rent every piece of the building. Every square foot, if it's an open air mall, every square foot of the parking lot, every square foot we're trying to rent. We're trying to get money on that. But what happens with rental? We have inflation. Our cost of operating the building, our cost for utilities, cost for taxes are always going up. So very seldom are we negotiating a flat lease with a tenant without what we call a stepped up rental. Typically it steps up every year, every couple of years. The rent increases are there. We very seldom say, oh, we're going to give you a flat lease. Unless they say, okay, we might give you a flat lease for 5 years, but you're going to participate in 100% of all the operating costs with no caps. Okay, this is the other thing. We can negotiate a lot of things in commercial leases. It would take years to talk about how to negotiate what to do in commercial leases. I got a call the other day from Michael's store down in Parkside. She said, lady, we've been having a plumbing leaks. And it's more than just the plumbing, we've been told by the plumber. More than just the plumbing. I'm like, okay. So the first thing I did, I hung up the phone. I called the 2 neighboring properties. Talked to TJ Maxx. I talked to the pet store managers. I said, tell me, are you guys having any plumbing problems? Because if they were having plumbing problems, I would know that it was a main drain, something backed up beyond the curb of the building. Both of them said, no, we're not having any problems. So I called Michael's back and I said, they're not having any problems. What do you mean? Well, we're waiting for the plumber report. So I pulled the lease out. The lease actually says we as a landlord are responsible for all their plumbing and electric. I've never seen that in any of my other leases. Somebody from Michael's did a good job negotiating that lease. It's very buried in the lease. She was right when she said, landlord, you're responsible for this. I almost went back and said, normally we don't do anything. You better take care of it and let me know what your problem is. But before I responded back to her, I actually looked at it. So now I'm waiting for them to tell me what's the problem. And again, until they do, I can't do anything about it. I'm not going to just send a plumber down there at whim. I'm going to wait for, they've already paid the money. Let's see what's going on before I send somebody down. So we want to, you got to be real careful. Every lease is negotiated individually. I have a boilerplate lease, but every lease gets negotiated individually. And my owners didn't build any of the buildings I'm managing today. They were built years ago. So they're somebody else's lease. And then every time they add a new tenant, it's their lease. So I have different forms I got to look at over time, different boilerplate leases. So we have rent control. Many cities have enacted rent control ordinances. Rent control is a price regulation imposed upon landlords. I don't know of any rent control properties in Ohio. I know of lots of rent control properties in Chicago, LA, and New York. And when you see rent control properties, you will see families live in a rent control property for generations. They hang on to it. They don't give it up. And there's nothing that says that they have to leave. They've got these long-term leases. They keep renegotiating, or they've got a long period they can stay in them because that rent control is a premium price. Again, rent control mostly is in residential. You will not see it in commercial leases.
Could it be passed down?
Huh?
Could it be passed down?
It's not passed down, but what happens is the son moves in with the mother. The mother leaves, the son still lives there. They've never changed the lease. It's just been one kind of person on the lease all the time.
Does it get adjusted for inflation?
A little, but rent control is held down pretty low.
Is there any incentive, like does the municipality give anything to the landlord?
No.
Nothing?
They were just ordinances put in place
Wow.
to say these are rent control properties.
Are they specific neighborhoods usually? Or?
It's poor areas, yeah. But still, compared to prices, what's going on with pricing today, these rent control properties are still at a premium. People don't want to leave them, don't want to give them up. Again, in our market, we won't see much about rent control. I can guarantee you there's never going to be a question on your test, State of Ohio, about rent control. Just not an issue we deal with. Writing requirements. Okay, Ohio says if a lease is longer than 1 year, it has to be in writing. Statute of Frauds. Okay, so oral leases are permissible as long as they're not longer than 1 year. You can have any kind of gentleman's agreement you want. That's what we call an oral lease, gentleman's agreement, as long as it's not longer than a year. So if it's 364 days, basically in Ohio, it can be an oral agreement. It does not have to be in writing. It doesn't violate statute of frauds. When writing is required, we still have leases. They're business contracts. We have to have names and signatures of the parties. We have to adequately describe the lease premises. Again, not a full legal description, but unit XYZ at this address is fine. We have to identify the duration of lease. All leases have a beginning and ending date. Contract has to have a beginning and ending date. And we state the amount of the rent to be paid. We also can say where the rent will be paid, how the rent will be paid. There's a lot of things that can go into that. Okay, with my leases today, we don't collect rent checks at our office anymore. When we do, we have to send it off to the lockbox. So we tell all our tenants to pay directly to the lockbox. It just delays things if it comes to our office and we have to submit it. Lockboxes for our properties are in Dallas and in Cleveland. So, and we don't accept cash. I haven't touched cash in a long time. Apartment complexes used to accept cash. A lot of them won't anymore because it endangers their employees to accept cash. So make it very clear they won't accept cash. We love it just if you start to do electronic payment. Everybody's getting on board with that. We'll fill out all your forms to tell you how to pay us electronically. That makes life simple. Common lease provisions. Again, what's the premises? What's the possession? How long? What's our rent? What's common area maintenance if it's a commercial type lease? What's the use that's allowed? This is where a residential lease is, as long as it's sleeping, it's legal. Shopping center leases, retail leases, the use dictates a whole lot. I have non-competing uses or other issues. So if I tell you you can be a salon, you're the only salon. I can't have another salon. Or you're the only this type of something. If I have those restrictions or I've agreed to those. We typically don't collect security deposits anymore. Most of your residential leases always collect security deposits. What is a typical security deposit?
1 month,
Why?
just in case if they skedaddle, you have that rent covered.
Why is it a month? What did you just said to me, in case they skedaddle, what did you just give your tenants permission to do by collecting 1 month's rent?
Stay 1 month for free.
Not pay the last month's rent and say, I've already paid you exactly 1 month's rent, I'm going to
You do
leave.
last month's rent as well.
You
First
can't.
month, last month.
In our markets, we don't see a lot of that, getting first and last month's rent, because that's a lot of cash to get a tenant to come to you. We should never make security deposit exactly 1 month's rent. Never. And we still do it. I just collected 1 month's rent yesterday from a commercial tenant. I thought, why don't they did that? Our security deposits should be exactly what they're meant for, which is damages in a residential lease. If you've owned a property for a long time and you see it costs XYZ to shampoo the carpet, it costs XYZ to make certain repairs, the rent might be $1,000 a month, but on average you can get by repairing premises for $500, you should make a security deposit of $500. When my kid paid a security deposit on his apartment, a house that he shared with a bunch of people, and he came to me and I said, did your landlord do a tenant move in, move out form when you all took that place over? No. And it was a mess. I mean, students had moved out one day, this group of students moved in the next day, and the place was disaster. It was bad. He left carpet tacks open and exposed. One of the bathrooms wasn't fixed and finished. It took him months to get that done. So I said to my kid, I said, why would you give him your last month's rent? Well, what do you mean? I said, because he's never going to give it back to you. He never intended to give it back to you. He's going to come back and say you owe him all this money for damages. Him and his friends lived in this place for 2 years. So I went back to him and I said, what you need to do is go back to your landlord and say, sir, I already paid my last month's rent. And he used to go visit him and pay rent. I said, just tell him you've already paid the last month's rent. Because he never, and he's telling this, he never did a move-in, move-out form. This landlord met me when the kids were in the process of signing a lease. The landlord knew what I did. And I just let my kid deal with it because he'd been dealing with it for a long time. And I said, just tell him you're not going to pay the rent. And he grumbled, he was upset, but he also knew that we were on to him. And he said, well, can you get out of the apartment, the house 3 days earlier? Sure, the kids could do that. But that way they didn't come up with cash the last month. And they weren't waiting around for security deposit to come back. Because the landlord made it exactly what 1 month's rent is. You should never do that.
They put security deposit in escrow?
Okay, in Ohio, security deposits are supposed to be put in escrow. They're not supposed to be commingled with funds. However, in Ohio, we also don't pay interest. In Arizona and other states, they pay interest.
Yeah, Florida has the interest.
So they have to have an accounting of the account, the interest-bearing account, and be able to turn that over to the tenant when the tenant leaves. In Ohio, not that involved. Now, if you buy an apartment building, you should get all security deposits along with that. You should have them turned over to you as the new buyer because that's a commitment to the tenants that are still there. A lot of people forget all about those kind of things. But in Ohio, you should keep it separate, but there's nothing. How do we go check your books to see that it's separate? What are we doing with it? We're not. It's just not a practical thing to do.
So what do? Do you just go to PNC and say, like, to start an escrow account?
Sure. You can have a non-interest-bearing escrow account. And in Ohio, you can have a savings account that, quote, that is an interest-bearing account, but the landlords don't have to turn the interest over to tenants, but they have to leave the money. They're supposed to account for it separately. As long as the money's there separately, they're doing what they can by law. And they can collect all the interest. They don't have to turn it over to the tenants. That's their right to do that. But if you all are doing any leasing, never make 1 month's rent the actual security deposit. A lease guarantee. This is something we ask for when we have tenants that are new, that don't have a long business credit history. We want to give them lease guarantees. They're personal guarantees. And believe me, we will come back after the tenants. It's not pretty, but we'll come back after them on a personal guarantee. When my kid rented his house, the landlord wanted the parents to sign off on the lease, and I said, hell no. I'm not going to sign off on your lease, and it's higher than my mortgage payment because it was near Xavier and what it was. And I said, I'm not vouching for your friends, your roomies. I don't know who the hell they are. They're your roomies. You've known them for a year maybe, and I'm glad you all are friends, but I'm sorry. I'm not putting my credit at risk to take care of your buddies. So I told his landlord I wasn't willing to sign it. Out of the 5 people, 1 parent did say they were going to do it, and I was like, more power to them if they think they got money, if somebody's going to. Because kids come and go. They move. They do different things. So I finally went back to the landlord and said, there's no parents willing to guarantee the lease. He said, that's okay. They don't have to do that. And he let them be flexible, changing roommates and doing things like that. But again, he did not do a good job cleaning up and taking care of things. So we did what we did. Maintenance and repairs. Who's going to take care of what? I said, my whole lease with Michael's. Who's responsible for that? In most storefronts, my tenants do all their own interior plumbing, electric, flooring, HVAC, everything. If it's common area, then it's my problem. The reason I asked about the other tenants having drain problems, again, if it's the main drain going out, as a landlord, I have to snake the main drain. That happens. Then I pay for that. It's common area costs. I'll backbill the tenants in their pass-throughs. But as a landlord, I'll pick up that cost to take care of it. We don't get full recovery, but we know as a landlord we've got responsibility to do some things. Alterations. Who's going to do alterations and how much? Who's going to pay for the alterations? In my tenant leases, I've got my salon suites going in right now. They gutted the storefront, and they're going to spend almost $1 million to rebuild all these little suites and everything. That's all of their cost. As a landlord, we'll give them some of that money back. That's part of the incentive for getting them to sign a lease and do the work. I've got another large tenant going in up in Dayton. We're not going to give them a whole lot of money, but what we're going to do is we're going to give them free rent to offset the money they're going to put in the building. So there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, what you're going to do. But alterations typically are tenant responsibility in commercial leases. Residential leases, when you walk into an apartment and you see that apartment, it should be move-in ready. And if it's not move-in ready, you probably shouldn't take it. Seriously. It should be move-in ready when they show it to you or they've signed a lease with you. You should be able to move in and they expect it all cleaned up. Everything should be working fine. If the appliances aren't working, the bathroom fixtures aren't working, there's a problem. Those are landlord, in residential leases, those are landlord responsibilities. Non-compete clauses, like I said, that would just be in commercial leases. And they can go all over the place. And the implied warranty of habitability. Duty requires that landlords provide premises that are fit, safe, and suitable for basic human habitation. We do this with all, whether it's residential or commercial, we have an implied warranty of habitability in saying that they can use it. It's a safe structure. It's a decent building, you can use it. Tenant's remedies for breach, again on the implied warranty, the tenant can terminate the lease, they can abandon the premises, they can repair and deduct. So, Michael's, the plumbing issue, they've already called the plumber. They've already spent some money. I can either reimburse them or I can tell them they can reduce their rent for that month, for that amount. I want to see the bill. And I may probably just do it that way because they're not my contractor that came in. They don't have certificates of insurance. They're not somebody I necessarily approve of. But they called them. We'll let them take care of that. Covenant of quiet enjoyment protects the tenant from landlord interference with the tenant's possession of property. So quiet enjoyment says you signed a lease for 5 years, you get to keep the space for 5 years. That's quiet enjoyment. You get to be there, use it for the 5 years or for whatever period. Act substantially threaten or actually interfere with the beneficial enjoyment of the premises. Again, this is why we have quiet enjoyment. Tenants' remedies for landlord's breach. They can file a lawsuit. They can withhold rent. They can repair and deduct. They can abate. They can terminate the lease, or this is what constructive eviction is. They can go to the courts and start paying. Formerly called constructive eviction. Landlord has right to access the premises. It's limited though. They're supposed to give notice. They're supposed to give 24-hour notice before they go into premises. Now the way around that, if you have a building where the landlord sprays for bugs every single month, and the landlord has an established schedule that they're going to spray for bugs every single month, they don't have to call you every month and say, bug spraying is happening. They just say it happens this certain day of every month. Guess what I can do as the manager? I can walk in with bug spray. I can inspect. I'm coming in with bug spray. That's how I got rid of a tenant one time. The bugs kept coming back. We couldn't understand why the bugs kept coming back. Well, she wasn't picking up. She was a nice young lady to meet her. You wouldn't know she had household issues. I'm not kidding. For her to sleep in her bed at night, she had to push shit out of the way, literally, to lay down in her bed at night. It was so bad. And we finally asked her to leave because she wasn't taking care of her premises. She was allowing, we couldn't spray. She had so much stuff all over the floors we couldn't spray the place. And every time we'd spray the other tenant spaces, 2 days later the bugs would come back again because we weren't killing them. So just keep that in mind. Landlords have ways around the notice provision if they're doing routine maintenance where they can come in and see stuff.
So what's the recourse if they're not? My landlord used to come in my building all the time.
Uh-huh.
We had security up, and he just walked through looking through my stuff.
And that's not allowed. They're not supposed to do that. And that could be a lawsuit.
And I paid my last month's rent.
Yeah.
He kept it.
And that could be a lawsuit.
Were,
Yeah, and falsified damages and everything else. But that could be a lawsuit today for not giving notice, for doing things. I went in with the bug sprayer because I had a concern about a safety issue. And I happened to be going in on bug spraying. That was exactly what we were going in about. But landlords have ways, like I said, if they suspect somebody's dealing drugs or something, they can come in for a repair issue or something.
is there a statute on suing the landlord? For that deposit? There's no
Oh,
amount of years
okay.
or whatever?
In Hamilton County and in most Ohio areas, when tenants pay a security deposit and they move out, landlord has 30 days to get it back to the tenant. If they don't give it back to the tenant in 30 days, it doubles. The tenant has to contact an attorney, but it will double. But this is too long ago.
Oh.
Okay, so it happened to me, and this is how I learned about it. I had apartments in Marymount. The tenant moved out, and when she moved out, she didn't give me forwarding address. She went to work for Limited Brands up in Columbus. And I reached out to try to find her. I called the switchboard up there. Limited Brands at that time had 30,000 employees. They didn't know who the hell I was calling about. So 2 days after the 30 days was up, we got a letter from her boyfriend, the prenatal attorney. He was studying to become an attorney. And we got a letter from him, and he said that we owed him double deposit. And we had to hire an attorney for the trust to go figure all that out. But here's the issue. They didn't leave me a forwarding address. So we didn't really owe him double deposit. But what I did on my move out inspection form, I actually put a whole block there where the tenant had to handwrite their forwarding address. So I never got stuck with that again. That's how I learned. This whole move in, move out checklist, I made it official with a forwarding address and everything on it. Got stung, but that's the experience. That's how you learn what to do. But years ago, it won't apply now. But if it's current, yes, we have these laws. Landlord has a right to cure tenant defaults. They can cure and perform obligations that tenant fails to perform, and they can demand tenant pay for these costs. Those are the repairs. I have an issue right now. I'm evicting a tenant. They actually abandoned the premises. They quit paying insurance. They quit doing a lot of stuff. So we're going back to them and we're telling them, you broke the lease, you defaulted, you closed the shop down, we're going to sue you for the rest of the lease. But I have a duty to mitigate my damages. So they have 2 more years on their lease, but I have another tenant that's coming in probably next 2 or 3 months. So I'm not taking them to court yet. I'm going to try to get that new tenant in place. I'm going to try to get all that deal done. So when I actually take them to court, with my attorney's blessings, we will take them to court and say they really don't owe 2 years of rent. They really only owe 3 more months of rent. because we mitigated our damages. We're able to release the premises and bring another tenant in. Now, I have another tenant in Illinois who called me and said, we just dissolved our business. We want to close down. I said, that's fine, but you have 3 more years on your lease. Have you talked to a broker in Illinois about trying to sublease your premises? Well, no, we thought you would take care of that. The landlord isn't going to tear up your lease. The landlord isn't giving away things. You have a signed lease. You have a contract. We don't care you dissolve your business. You all have a personal guarantee. You have a contract. It's up to you to find a replacement tenant and make something happen. It's not up to us. Not with 3 years out on a lease. Now, you're more than welcome. Turn it over to me now, and I'll try to lease it. But I can tell you, I'm not going to be in a real hurry to lease it because I got other spaces that are vacant there. I don't have to lease your space first. So we kind of have these discussions with them. Americans with Disabilities Act. It prohibits discrimination against disabled individuals. It applies to places of public accommodation. Public accommodation would be any public building that has like a public lobby. Where anybody can walk into your building, that's considered public accommodation. Now, if you have doors that have security access and only people can come in the building that have a pass code or something to come in, that's not really public accommodation anymore. But you manage an office building today with multi-tenants, the lobby is a public place. So you have to make it accessible. What's required? Reasonable accommodations. What are reasonable accommodations? The older building over there was built in the 50s. They just recently have remodeled all the bathrooms over there. And if you notice, the bathrooms no longer really have doors on them, or the doors kind of stay open, but they have these walls that you kind of go around to go into the bathroom. People in wheelchairs prefer that. They don't want to have to reach up and open a door. They'd rather have a wall to go around, to maneuver around. People on crutches, same kind of thing. You know, if you're trying to work with a walker, it's easier to maneuver around something than to try to set something down and open a door. So they've done some better things. They've made all the stalls over there are accessible. They have the right number and all that kind of stuff. But I've been here for a long time, over 30 years, and I've watched them do things to that older building to do accommodations, to make it publicly accessible. The front stairs, if you come in the very main entrance, it still has steps. It's not accessible. They didn't put a ramp, they didn't put a little chairlift or anything. But what they do is they have signs that say go over to this exit or go to this entrance. Not the best way, but it does accommodate. So we don't expect people to tear it out, put a ramp in, do a lot of dollars of improvements. It's practical improvements. When you're remodeling a building and you take out